Howdy, y'all. It's Juliet Necro, the world's prettiest gamer. I announced this on Twitter before, but yes, I did change the order of the videos in my New Year's schedule. So this month is ZeroRanger instead of Valkyria, which I've swapped out to next month. This ZeroRanger video is what J.R.R. Tolkien might describe as a tale that grew in the telling. What was originally supposed to be a simple review of a game whose art style caught my eye, and maybe a bit of an ego trip, turned out to be a very important video that I'm very proud of, and a much more deeply personal one than I had anticipated. I had originally planned, before I began on making monthly videos instead of weekly videos, to cover Ikaruga, but wasn't satisfied that I had fully experienced the game. This was a big catalyst for moving to the new video format. I'll be talking about Ikaruga more later in this video, after I've thoroughly given ZeroRanger its due. As I've admitted in previous videos, I love difficult games and challenge runs, and this was going to be another feather in my cap. But things changed in the interim, and ZeroRanger wound up becoming a very important game to me. Before I get into my own experience, I want to talk about why ZeroRanger is so neat on its own merits. I said in my New Year's video that I wanted to play it because of its art, after all. I didn't know at the time how important a game would become to me. For starters, ZeroRanger is a total feast for the eyes presentation-wise. The extremely simple color scheme is incredibly appealing to me. The game uses precisely 8 shades in the whole game. 3 of green, 3 of orange, pure white, and pure black. It makes for a very striking, high-contrast style that suggests old-timey hardware limitations without actually having to stick to them. I spent a lot of my young childhood playing Game Boy games on the Super Game Boy, which colorized games with a variety of 4-color palettes. I've loved that aesthetic ever since, and ZeroRanger's limited palette suggests that without actually having to commit that far. Its greater range allows it to convey more depth and detail than a truly Game Boy-style 4-color palette could. In addition to the lovely default palette, you actually unlock extra palettes to switch to, including switching green for blue or gray, a Christmas palette, and a couple of others that definitely call to mind some of those Game Boy palettes that I mentioned. ZeroRanger does a lot with that extra detail by having some absolutely lovely background art. The image of the tree in the opening stage, giving way to cityscape, was breathtaking to me when I first saw it. And then, later on in the same stage, you can see that the cityscape becomes bombed out just before the first boss is revealed to be a bomber-like ship. There are onions, which are associated with the game's villains, in the background of stage 2. And when you finish the stage, you see the sun after being underground the whole time. Stage 3 starts on the surface, flying over the ocean, proceeds up a giant space elevator, and ends in orbit around the planet. And stage 4 is the whirlwind tour of the innards of the living ship Green-Orange that the alien invaders came from. Enemies that appear from behind can often be seen flying in from a different elevation, before presumably looping around from off-screen to attack. Another fun feature is the layers of references to other games and anime that permeate ZeroRanger. In my playtime, I've spotted references to Gurren Lagann, Gundam, Evangelion, Fate, Gradius, R-Type, Space Invaders, Dodonpachi, possibly Undertale, and more that I know I've seen before but have managed to somehow forget what they actually are, which is somewhat embarrassing. While some may say that including a lot of references to one's inspirations detracts from a work, I find it appealing as a way to see where it came from. It gives a sense of the tone that's trying to be conveyed, and even great works do it. Lord of the Rings has a bunch of Macbeth references in it, and Evangelion is full of Ultraman, for example. It's also even just fun from the standpoint of getting to be the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's pointing at the TV for a minute. Also, the music in this game absolutely rules. It's so good, I'm still listening to it outside the game to write this video. Many people have pointed out that the music in this game has Mega Man X or Mega Man Zero energy, and I'm inclined to agree. The tracks all have great titles too, by the way. Gameplay-wise, there's a lot of fun things about ZeroRanger. Like many shoot-'em-up games, ZeroRanger has a combo system that increases your score the longer you keep it going. It goes up to 6.4 times the normal score, but goes up to 12.8 when you switch your fighter into ZeroRanger mode, which I'll get to in a minute. One of the most interesting things about this system is that sometimes, to keep your combo going, you counterintuitively have to delay destroying an enemy or two in order to link them to the next group of enemies. Your combo has a timer till it goes away, so there's a nail-biting tension in waiting just long enough to maintain it and then keep it going afterwards. ZeroRanger is actually very generous with extra lives, so learning to maintain a combo is very helpful at getting further into it. In addition to being generous in this way, ZeroRanger is very kind with allowing the player to learn its tricks. Unlike in other shoot-'em-ups, where the option to add extra continues is in the options menu, ZeroRanger awards you with extra continues, up to 8 after game overs. I can say from experience that it can be frustrating when playing a shoot-'em-up to get a bit further than you ever have and immediately game over, so this system gives you a bit of a cushion while also tying thematically into the story. This mercy doesn't mean the game is easy, far from it. It will kick your ass even if you have 8 continues in your pocket, at least until you learn its tricks. As in all shoot-'em-ups, awareness, patience, and nerve are your keys to success. Another fun gameplay feature is the ZeroRanger itself. Starting towards the end of Stage 3, you get the ability to transform your ship into a mecha with a short-range attack, which extends your combo meter to 12.8 times, as I said. You lose your range, including having no backwards attack at all, in exchange for being able to do some close-up damage more quickly and score more points. It's a very fun trade-off, and finding times where it's safe to fit in the ZeroRanger in order to maximize your combo is a lot of fun. Right after you get it, I can only describe the end of Stage 3 and the beginning of Stage 4 as a big score attack playground for your new toy, which is so much fun. Lastly, some of the absolute highlights of this game are the boss fights. Both fights against the Grapefruit Fighter are some of my favorites in any game, as is the fight with Green Orange. There's even a boss rush halfway through, populated with wholly unique bosses. There's a Space Invaders homage, and a big lizard, and a brain which I feel like is probably a reference to something, and a monk whose story I'll get to in a moment. Every boss is great, except the mini-boss R-Typo. Fuck R-Typo. Lastly, ZeroRanger provides a lot of ways to add variety to your experiences. You have a choice of 2 different ships, the Type B Rib and the Type C Decker. Type B's primary fire hits a wider area, but is less damaging because it's more diffuse, while Type C's is more direct but narrower, which can sometimes make maintaining a combo more of a challenge. In addition, at the end of each stage, you get a choice of 2 upgrades, and these upgrades behave differently depending on which ship you are playing with. This also extends to the ZeroRanger's weapons behavior. My personal loadout is Type B with the backward shot, the charge shot, and the drill for the ZeroRanger. However, I can easily see how someone with a different playstyle from me would prefer the exact opposite and have perfectly valid reasons for doing so. That's the good stuff, when you can tell another person would have a great reason for choosing to build their character different from you. That's a sign of good design. I'd like to discuss this game's story now, because it's actually got some pretty interesting things going on, especially for the standards of a shoot-'em-up game. If you want to experience the game unspoiled, without my commentary, I'll give you the timestamp in the description. Are we good? Alright. ZeroRanger literally opens with an AI telling you to surrender. It claims that there's no hope that you'll beat the alien threat from the spaceship Green Orange, so you might as well surrender. Naturally, being a gamer, you choose the no I won't surrender option, because you know that's the way that leads to gameplay. But immediately, the precedent has been set that this is going to be a struggle, that there's going to be suffering. The first time you get a game over, when the extra continues are introduced as a concept, you are told to avoid ignorance and attachment, and that you should try to attain enlightenment. Once you receive your continues, they are placed on a Dharma wheel that gradually fills with the points you receive on this and each subsequent run. That phrase, "May you attain enlightenment," appears elsewhere, even in the little perfunctory boss fight briefings that you get in this and many other shoot-'em-up games. It's not a bold claim to say that there's a current of Buddhism that flows through this game. Now forgive me if I make any mistakes when discussing this, as I'm not a Buddhist myself. Please include your critiques and comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. Video games are uniquely well suited to exploring themes related to religions like Buddhism. One of the most central tenets of Buddhism is the cycle of reincarnation, which a practitioner can escape by achieving enlightenment. Many, or possibly even most video games, involve a cycle of death and rebirth, and ZeroRanger, being an arcade-style space shooter, is obviously no exception. While dying and being resurrected over and over again isn't an explicit part of the text like it is in Dark Souls or Undertale, it is definitely meant to be understood that way, through a Buddhist framework. Learning to play a video game like ZeroRanger or any other space shooter inevitably involves making mistakes and learning from them, which means dying and trying again. In this way, we can see finishing the game as achieving enlightenment and escaping the cycle of death and reincarnation. There's a lot of evidence that what is happening to the characters of ZeroRanger is explicitly a cycle. When the player reaches the very center of the alien spaceship Green Orange, they are confronted by Erasure OS, the very computer that encourages you to surrender when you first boot up ZeroRanger. It again encourages you to give up, but the player does not have the option to refuse, sending you to the boss rush section of Stage 4. Of these, 3 are just fun bosses, but one is of particular interest. When the boss selecting roulette lands on the human skull, you are sent to confront a figure dressed like a human Buddhist monk. If you shoot his anime snot bubble instead of his body, you can wake him up and avoid fighting him. And he tells you that he too once tried to fight Green Orange and failed, leading to his imprisonment here. From this we get the implication that this cycle has been going on even before the player became aware of it. Once you finish the boss rush in Stage 4, Erasure OS claims that it has a solution to the problem, and sends you back, all the way to Stage 1. Not only does the player live through a cycle of death and rebirth by getting game overs, but they have to live through the stages a second time, even in a successful run. These 3 stages are extremely similar to the originals, but with fun twists. Stage 1 begins with the entire city already bombed out, and more enemies appear from behind since you now have ways to hit them. Stage 2 has a new boss that's even foreshadowed prior to its arrival. Stage 3 has a giant enemy crab, for crying out loud. If you confront the Grapefruit Fighter and activate ZeroRanger, you get the opportunity to fight its true form, which is one of the game's best boss fights. So you fight through remixed, harder versions of the first 3 stages, and you arrive at Erasure OS's chamber again, and this time it presents you a different solution in its terms. It gives you an orb, which if you take, you get a cutscene of Green Orange exploding in the beginning of a credits sequence until it glitches out. After the glitch, you go back to the title screen, which now says Final Boss instead of ZeroRanger. Upon starting up Final Boss, you're greeted by another alternate version of Stage 1, with a dance music remix and gameplay more like Dodonpachi than the rest of the game. However, the twist is that you can't die in Final Boss, no matter how hard you try. If you pause the game during Final Boss, you can see that you have infinite continues. When you beat the boss, you find another orb like the one Erasure OS gave you in the first place. If you take it, you get looped back to the beginning of Final Boss again. This will keep happening as long as you keep grabbing the orb. The only way to escape is to deny the cycle and destroy the orb. It is particularly noticeable that the orb is referred to in-game as a lotus gem. I found out later that lotuses symbolize purity in Buddhism, but my initial thought upon reading that line was the story of the Lotus Eaters from the Odyssey, who stayed in a dream world much like Final Boss rather than accept the truth. That made the obvious answer to destroy the Lotus Gem and escape Final Boss, with some help from the Grapefruit Fighter. Once you do, you finally get to meet the boss of Green Orange. Final Boss is such an interesting part of the game because it presents what would seem like perfection. It's got exciting music and cool effects, and you can't even lose, but it's hollow and endless. Only by giving it up can one escape and see the endgame. Lastly, there is one more element of Buddhism and cycle breaking to this game. After you beat Green Orange, the remaining aliens conquer the world even though Green Orange is destroyed. Erasure OS presents one last possibility. Go back in time and destroy the Primordial Fighter before the cycle can begin. To do this, you have to give up all the continues you've built up. And mind you, you lose them whether you beat the Primordial Fighter in the past or not. Here, at last, is more Buddhism. Giving up something you've built up for the chance to break the cycle and attain enlightenment. When you beat the Primordial Fighter, you get one last big reveal. Erasure OS is actually the sister of Green Orange, the Primordial Fighter. Green Orange stole the Lotus Gem and fled to space in ancient times, and was corrupted by the loneliness and her greed for the Lotus Gem. By giving up the gem yourself, you've finally broken the cycle and allowed the world to be reborn. The end of the game, with Erasure OS taking human form, made me want to cry tears of joy. After being booted back to the menu, I noticed a few changes. For one thing, the 2 modes are now called simply Light Mode and Normal Mode, as opposed to White Vanilla and Green Orange, and some of the flavor of the ancient conflict has disappeared. The numbers show up as normal Arabic numerals instead of the strange ones used in certain spots, and your number of continues is represented on the pause menu by a simple Arabic numeral, as opposed to a row of lotus gems. Conspicuously, the options menu includes an option to reset all of your progress, which I suspect will restore all of that flavor. There's one last bit of the theme here. You can keep going, but the cycle is a little bit different, a little less flavorful now. I think that someday I'll reset my progress so that I can see the game like I did when I first played it again, but in the meantime, I want to see everything it has to offer. I've barely touched white vanilla mode, and there's still more stuff to unlock. But someday I will, in fact, attain enlightenment. It really is a strong story, and one that I feel truly uses the medium of video games very well. Someone who knows more about Buddhism than me could make more salient points, but I feel that it lends itself to exploration in games fantastically. ZeroRanger's story is certainly way more involved than one might expect from a space shooter, as I've demonstrated, but I found its theme of enlightenment and breaking cycles to be pretty profound. It's definitely worth experiencing for yourself. I've basically reviewed ZeroRanger now, and the things that I talk about in the preceding minutes are all components of why I love it. But it's time to get a little more deeply personal. In case you can't tell, I am a trans woman. This is the first video I've made that includes my name, and that makes me very happy. I realized that I'm trans while I was producing my Minecraft video, and edited any gendered language out of the script for it. In the Final Fantasy VI and Doom videos, I never refer to myself by name, only as Necro. Celes has my name in the footage of my Final Fantasy VI video. In the Doom video, I make a joke about pulling up my big girl pants. The signs were there if you were some kind of smarty pants brain genius, but being able to say it out loud is a wonderful feeling. In my whole life, almost 26 years now, I've never really felt like I was a man. I often try to convince myself that I was in various ways, like growing a beard, joining a fraternity, and cultivating a taste for whiskey. I don't regret the latter two things, but my reasons weren't pure. I do regret the beard, though. I grabbed my razor and murdered that nasty thing. Now that I know I'm a woman and I look back at my life, I remember a few times that I thought I might like to be a girl, but never told anyone because of a lack of knowledge of trans people and fear of how the people in my life might react. The earliest I remember was feeling strange watching the episode of Pokemon with Duplica when I was like 8. I first met a trans person when I was in high school, but by then the person I'm supposed to be was buried so deeply that she needed more time before she could emerge. Some trans people experiment with their gender before having a full realization, but in my case I was terrified of doing anything even slightly feminine for fear of people's reactions. Whenever I did try doing anything feminine, I found that I loved it. The first time I painted my nails was on my birthday last year, and I was happy for days afterwards. Turns out that was gender euphoria before I even knew my gender. Somehow, I didn't take that as a sign at the time. As I aged, I never really felt like I was a man, more of a large child. I tried to pin a masculine identity on a lot of things, as I said before, but more than anything else, I pinned a lot of my supposed theoretical masculinity on video games. Obviously, the idea that video games are boy stuff is very immature and just factually untrue. But I was in middle and high school when I settled on this idea, and I didn't really know any other girls who played games like I did. So that was how I convinced myself that I was a boy for so many years. I was a boy because I loved games. Not only that, but I tied up a lot of my masculine identity specifically with being good at video games. This probably started from playing Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3 on Virtual Console when I was in middle and high school, and from there I pinned a lot of my ego and masculinity on being able to win in difficult games or challenge runs. I worked on improving playtimes in games like Super Metroid or improving my score in Star Fox 64, and branched out to games like the Souls series and Cuphead. One of the most notable of these was Doom Eternal, which of course I still love. But let me tell you the problem with making being good at difficult games a big part of your identity and your gender. If you pin your identity and gender to something like that, it feels really, really bad when you fail. This is the gray area where gamer rage is born. Fighting game commentators can tell you this. Salt is the reaction when expectations don't match reality. And in my case, it was even worse because so much of my gender was tied up in being a gamer. There was plenty of evidence of this if you remember when I used to stream on Twitch last year. When I was playing a game I was familiar with, it was a lot of fun. I was laughing, making jokes, having a good time. But as soon as I was confronted with unfamiliarity or difficulty in front of others, I hated it and got frustrated. In one stream, I gave up on getting over it with Bennett Foddy in about half an hour. I loved finishing these challenges, but my idea of masculinity prevented me from enjoying the process of getting there. I've played competitive Smash Brothers on and off since high school, and I got into traditional fighting games last year, but was prevented from seriously advancing in them because my effort at masculinity made me feel entitled to getting results without putting in the effort. I thought, I'm good at games, this shouldn't be happening to me. The sting I felt from video game failure was magnified by how central success was to my identity. Retroactively, I realized that a lot of my salt was secretly a form of dysphoria. The journey was long, but I'm glad I'm here now. I met more trans people when I went to college and discovered more trans creators online. I realized that I was fascinated by the lives of trans women. I loved their humor, I loved their style, I loved their voices, both in the literal sense of finding them nice to listen to, and being fascinated by the things they have to say. I convinced myself, however, that it wasn't me, that I was just a good ally. It was totally normal for cis men to think about transitioning frequently, right? Right? I was forced to ask myself the age-old question, do I feel like a man or a woman? The answer is, I feel like a total gamer babe and I've never been happier. In the end, it feels so good to finally stop lying to myself and start becoming the person that on some level I've always wanted to be. I feel more driven, more creative. I sleep better than ever, and it just feels good to exist from day to day. I'm okay with being alone with my thoughts now, unlike before when I couldn't exist without distracting myself in some way. When I created this YouTube channel, it was at least partially out of a desire to document my video game achievements for more people to see, to scream out my pathetic attempts at masculinity to the online void. I did precisely 2 videos in 2021, and was planning a third on a little game called Ikaruga. This was one of the breaking points for my masculine gamer ego. I was mostly unfamiliar with the space shooter or shoot-'em-up genre, or whatever you want to call it, and here I was trying to beat one of the hardest games in that genre. Not only that, but I initially refused to use any of the features designed to help learn the game, like increasing the number of continues or practicing individual stages, because I was concerned with earning achievements, like anyone cared about the achievements I was earning in a game I owned on Steam aside from me. I was making myself suffer, making the experience less fun for myself, to try and prove that I really was masculine like I'd been told all my life that I was. This was about a month or so before I realized I'm trans. As that revelation crept up, I started realizing that I was allowed to enjoy the process. I did start practicing stages individually. I stopped rage quitting if attempts didn't go the way I wanted right off the bat, and I increased the number of continues so that I could actually learn more of the game and have fun while doing it. It became less of a merciless slog than before, and I realized, maybe tying so much of my ego into this isn't so good after all. This was when one of the last walls gave way. After finally admitting that my gender wasn't male, I realized that I'm a woman, and I'm so happy. I didn't realize how much of my experience of playing games has changed since the realization until I picked up ZeroRanger for this month's video. I feel so little of the frustration I felt before when playing a tough game. For me now, there's only the joy of learning and experiencing the great game, getting to devour all of its nuances and advance further and further. Mind you, I absolutely still love difficult games, but my reasoning has changed. I like difficult games not out of some sense that it makes me cool if I'm good at them. That's frankly kind of childish. What matters to me is getting to master a game, to enjoy its nuances and subtleties, to join its community and to learn things from people that have already experienced it. I've learned to enjoy the process rather than just wanting to stick a trophy on the proverbial wall. I am done playing these kinds of games out of a sense of ego or masculinity, or trying to prove myself better than others. I used to say, back when I thought I was a man, that I only played video games to get mad and to win. Getting mad and winning don't matter at all. It's about having fun. So you know what? Summon all the extra help you need in that Souls game, or build a magic character. Play on easy mode, use the super guide, look up walkthroughs, use save states. It's all there to make the game more fun for you. You just have to use it. And if you do still want to do things the hard way, then just remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. It's okay to struggle and screw up, as long as you're compassionate to yourself and keep committing to learning what you need to improve on. Obviously, playing a silly little game on my silly little computer doesn't compare in intensity. But if you're like me and just starting to transition, or you're questioning your gender or sexuality, have the same grace for yourself. Learning to present in a new way can be intimidating, especially in today's climate. But just remember, cis people weren't born knowing how to present masc or femme or anything else about gender, because gender is all something we learn with time. Be kind to yourself. You'll get to where you want to be. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if this video resonated with you. Links to my socials and my anime podcast will be in the description. Till next time, ciao. May you attain enlightenment.